Did you know that at low tide, the River Thames, where I'm standing today, is the longest archaeological site in the UK? Hi, my name's Nicola White. I'm a mudlark and artist, and here today on the Thames foreshore with me is Dr Claire Harris and Dr Hana Morel of Museum of London Archaeology to tell us more about archaeology and the River Thames.
I'm an archaeologist and I also do heritage studies as well, and over the past 10 years or so I got really interested in exploring and learning more about how archaeology and heritage could help understand things like sustainability and climate change. So I'm working at the Museum of London as Sustainability and Advocacy Lead, and have been involved in a lot of different projects about linking culture, heritage and climate change.
I'm working for the Thames Discovery Programme, which is part of MOLA, and I'm the development officer. My background is in Paleolithic archaeology, so the Stone Age archaeology, so my interest in climate change has come from a very long perspective. More recently I've been working on the Thames and tying in that more recent story of what we can learn from archaeology and climate change on the Thames.
Climate change is a key topic for this discussion, and I was recently reading an archaeological magazine actually, and it said climate change not only threatens the future but the past, and I found that quote really interesting. And I wondered, is that true, and how does climate change affect heritage and archaeology, and how does it affect rivers and the Thames in general?
Climate change can impact it in a lot of different ways. For one, it could, for example, on the foreshore, it can expose different archaeological materials, which leads to its erosions. It can shift in how people carry out their livelihoods from fishing, so it changes how we grow crops, how we fish, various agricultural behaviors. It can let things go into the sea, so change the way that we do things, change where we have picnics. So it really is a vast impact across the board. But Claire, maybe you could add on that?
So when we're thinking about the Thames, it's a very different river than it would have been in the past. The river now is maybe a third of the width that it was in the past, and changes along the foreshore have been really impacted by the climate and by people's behaviour, and people have had to continually adapt to the changing climate. We're at Greenwich today, and it would have become a place that people wanted to live when more of the land became usable, so that's to do with climate. We're seeing more rapid climate change now and real changes along the foreshore.
For sure there will be loss moving forward, but our work that we do as archaeologists and people who are heritage practitioners are trying to make sure that we keep a record and we keep that knowledge and insight of things that are of most value to us and most significant to us.
So the area over here is the area that's actually a scheduled ancient monument, and it was scheduled because this is a really important stretch of foreshore in terms of our understanding and knowledge of Tudor history. And at the time, this was the area that they thought had the most archaeological remains, so they, around a decade ago, scheduled this area. And it shows you just how much this stretch of foreshore has changed, because if we look at this area and then we actually change direction, and we can see the recently published Tudor jetty, which at the time wasn't really visible, so it is actually outside of the scheduled monument. And that really tells you something about how much the level of the foreshore has changed in that last decade. It's quite staggering when you've got those timbers that are now so much above the height of the foreshore. So it's a really important stretch of the foreshore for Tudor archaeology, tying into the palace. There would have been a very different wall, so the alignment of the wall was different, so we can look at the ways that the jetties come out from the foreshore, and also other alignments. There's a small remnant of possibly the old Tudor wall, and so the alignment for some reason or other was a different alignment to the river, so the jetties go in the alignment of the wall rather than, if you try and look at them now, they look at the wrong alignment of the wall. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's a bit.
I think, Claire, you were going to say something about fish traps that aren't quite exposed.
Yeah, so the fish traps have, we found them previously, but we can only ever see them on a particularly low tide, and today is not a particularly low tide. And it's interesting because that's telling us something about how high the tide would have been when those fish traps were in use.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, fish traps, you have to set them somewhere that the fish swim into them, but then as the tide goes out on the low tide they are stranded in there, but you also want to be able to go and retrieve your fish.
Yeah.
So wherever they are now, we couldn't go and retrieve any fish if they were still working. So that tells us something about the changing tide levels from when they were being used to the present day.
And you can kind of start to even do comparisons across the world with different areas that still use what we can kind of consider sustainable fishing methods versus whether it's possible now, and how particular countries and particular communities have even lost that ability because of shifting tides, rising sea levels, and just that loss of knowledge as well. So there's a heap of just knowledge, insights, ways of life that we can actually understand from something as simple as a fish trap.
Archaeologists get overly excited about drains because they can tell us things about the areas that needed that drainage. So over in the corner on old maps you have something that was called the mud hole, and it's really caused lots of problems for this area because of the mud being less of a stable surface. You've also got old drains that align still with the way that water comes down onto the foreshore, so there's remains of an old sluice or a drain there that would have been taking the water away from on land. So people trying to make areas on the land more usable by creating that drainage into the river, and you see that along the Thames, and you get some of these amazing log drains which I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
and they're absolutely fantastic. And if you ever seen the images of people making them? So they're brilliant because they have to bore into them. So these log drains are entire trees, and they bore a hole through them and then join them all together to direct the water away from the wet areas into the Thames.
Can you explain to us how long Thames Discovery Programme have been involved in monitoring and recording all these archaeological sites? Because it's not just Greenwich, there's archaeological sites all up and down the Thames. It's such a rich place, full of history. So how long have you been involved in that?
So Thames Discovery Programme has been going for 15 years, and it was built on the Thames Archaeological Survey, which happened in the 90s. So over the 15 years we've been coming to Greenwich for since 2010, I think, and monitoring the stretch of foreshore. So we've been doing that with our own field work, coming down, recording the archaeology that's left on the foreshore and building up that knowledge, so we can year on year, season on season, see what's being revealed or what's being eroded, what's changing. And so we do that with set fieldwork periods, but we also have these amazing volunteers, our frogs, who come down perhaps monthly to look at any changes on the foreshore, take photographs, look at the areas that are eroding or areas that are building up. And they just have this real intimate knowledge of the stretch of foreshore, a real sense of ownership and place. And I think building on climate stories can give that to a wider community, so we can really share what we've learnt with the world. There are lots of little ways that we can look at the changes in tide levels. There's been some amazing work done about the changing tides in the Roman city and how that influenced the growth of the Port of London, and how with the changes in the tidal head that would change as well. So within the archaeology we find these different clues. We can look at on the sides of some of the jetties, the rubbing timbers, and the different ways that they're which parts are eroding, which parts have algae on, and all of those things are telling us again about those changes in river heights. And the changes in river height, as we know, are going to be something that's affected by climate change, and we're going to have rising sea levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with the tidal river, we're going to have those higher high tides. At Greenwich, we're already in an area where in the last couple of years we've seen the high tides washing over the current river wall. So, Nicola, we've talked about the river wall and the fact that it's been raised over different decades, and this is a really good point to see because it's been recently repaired, so we can see the obvious difference in the building materials. So if we just look here, we can see at the base we've got the large blocks of stone, and then we go up into some bricks, newer bricks because it's been repaired, and on top of that we've got the concrete block. So Museum of London Archaeology recently did some work behind this wall as it was being repaired, but the height of the river wall has been raised each time that there's been a need to work with rising tide levels. So we've come off the foreshore and we're stood now in front of Trinity Hospital, and this is a good place to talk about river walls a little bit more. So the river wall was probably first built around the time of Trinity Hospital, so around the 1600s, and then we've got various plaques on this wall which tell us a little bit more about the changing height of tides. So if we look here, we've got one about a high tide in 1874. So we've got quite a height of wall above this. And then we've also, if you move to the other side, we can look at a plaque that really tells us one of the sad stories about the flooding that can affect London. So here we're looking at a plaque which says extraordinary high tide, and many of your viewers will know that this tide on January the 7th, 1928 saw many deaths across London and devastation in many areas, including at Greenwich. So 75 foot of this wall was demolished by that high tide. And we're just thinking now about the power of those tides. Today when we were down on the foreshore, the river looked very calm, very friendly, but the water has huge power and it's caused devastation in the past, and we can learn from archaeology about some of that devastation, and we can also think about ways of adaptation and mitigation for the potential of flooding in the future.
So do you think this means that we're going to have to raise the seawalls again in the future then?
They are due to be raised by another metre.
So I've got a question for you both. Can archaeology inspire climate action?
Absolutely, in so many different ways. So at the start I was talking about the various strands of archaeology, from the built environment all the way to, let's say, land and sea management. Archaeology can help repurpose a building, reuse historic buildings. As they say, the greenest building is one that already exists. It can help understand the way that people have gone through land management, sea management. I think at the moment even farmers, for instance, have sustainable ways of farming, or even cutting hedgerows, making hedgerows, which have immense amounts of wildlife and biodiversity in it as well. And if you poke into communities, you'll find that at the heart, so many people understand sustainability in from the smallest to the biggest ways. Reusing and sewing old clothes, for example, or stitching, or ways of weaving. Those things are a form of heritage.
And I think as well, it's talking about, as you say, sustainable practices, learning about the way that people might have built to work with the climate that they were living in. But it's also, as you said, it's thinking about that adaptability, and I think there's something really positive there. And it's not saying that we don't try and stop or limit climate change, but it's saying that we can adapt, that we can have resilience by knowing that we've coped with change in the past. And I think part of what archaeology can offer is a way of thinking about that loss and damage and giving communities the resilience to acknowledge them, to work with them, to mourn loss, but to move forward.
Yeah, we as humans, alongside our environments and our friendly little animals and our ecosystem, we've actually managed to endure the most trying and testing times throughout history, and it is something that we can do moving forward. It's just we also need to bear in mind the impact that we have on the environment with everything that we do. And I think archaeology and heritage really bring in that human story and that animal story as well.
So before we go and have a nice cup of coffee, it's always good to finish with some solutions and something positive. What actions can people take to be more sustainable?
So I think we've got a few that come to mind. For example, instead of taking the car places, you could take public transport or cycle. I think you could be more conscious about what you eat, perhaps choose to buy locally rather than fruits and vegetables that might have had to come from afar. And Claire, you were talking about gardens and what people can do there.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about water today, and we've talked about ways of mitigating some of the extreme weather events, of helping to slow down the way that water gets into rivers. So we can think about the way that we landscape our gardens. We can think about having more soft landscaping, not having tarmac drives perhaps, or front gardens given over to cars. Why not give them over to nature?
Yeah, and I think also following from there's little tips with gardens as well, like for example having a bucket of water for wildlife that gets thirsty during heat waves is something that's a really simple thing that you can do, and just making sure that you don't remove all of these natural little dwellings that wildlife can hide in our line of work. And we've been kind of thinking about new ways of working in a very kind of eco-friendly or sustainable way to reduce our carbon emissions. And it's been an incredibly inspiring, I guess, journey for a lot of team members, and have taken it to heart and are looking at new ways to be more sustainable. I mean, one of the most obvious ones actually are just even pulling out plugs and not leaving them plugged in can make a massive difference. So that's something that we're doing at MOLA at the moment.
Yeah, and we've been looking as well at whenever we have an event, looking at our catering, trying to go for something sustainable there. And with my work that I've been doing with schools and things with loan boxes, we've been using bike couriers instead of using cars, or if we are using vehicles, turning over to electric vehicles.
Yeah, and also PPE.
Yeah.
Reusing them, rebranding them if needed, and making sure that they don't end up in landfills. So
there's so many things that we can all do to make a difference. And Hannah and Claire, where can people find out more about Museum of London Archaeology, or MOLA?
So MOLA have got a brand new website, and you can find us online at mola.org.uk, and you'll find everything there about the Thames Discovery Programme, about the work that we've done in the past and our plans for the future. You could even join us on the foreshore for a walk.
Thank you very much indeed for joining me today, Claire and Hannah. I've so enjoyed this experience of talking to you about archaeology in the Thames and the effect that climate change has on all of this heritage. And thank you very much for watching, everybody. Your comments are most welcome. Let us know what you think. And I think it's time for a coffee, don't you?
yeah.
Right, let's go.